How's it going, Jeff? It's really good to finally have you on the podcast here. You know, we've been trying to put this thing together for several months, but then, it's just one thing after the other in both of our lives that, randomly comes up like 30 minutes before we're going to do it.
I know. The stars have finally aligned, Joe. It's good to finally, make it happen. So glad to be here.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm sure we're going to have a great conversation. Hopefully it'll be valuable to some people out there.
I hope so. It's an interesting world that I live in daily. That hopefully we can get a couple nuggets out there that'll really help folks, just based on what I see day to day with this world of insane access and privilege risk in the cloud. So.
Oh man, I can talk about IAM forever. But before we get into the IAM stuff, Jeff, why don't we start with, what your background is, why you got into IT, why you got into security, what that journey was like. Was it faster than you expected? Was it slower than you expected? What was that like?
Yeah. So I've been in InfoSec now for a little over 20 years now. Yeah. And I've been in IT since 99. And it's interesting. I went to college here in Atlanta, and I got a degree in human resources, Joe. It is the last thing that you would expect with what I've been doing the last 20 plus years. But I quickly realized that after I went to business school, that is not what I wanted to do full time. I was really a nerd at heart. Been ripping apart PCs since I was, since the early 90s, logging into BBXs and all that crazy stuff, using Gopher and all that, the stuff that really, really dates me as I talk about it now and think about it. But I was like, you know what? I want to get into tech. That's what I really want to do. And back then, like one of the big training centers all over the world was called ExecuTrain. And I went there and got my A+ cert back in 99. And they saw I had a passion and they offered me a gig. They were like, do you want a job here setting up classrooms every day? And Joe, that fast tracked me through the whole, NT4, MCSE stuff, and, setting up 13 Microsoft classes a day. You'll learn real quick. Right. And so that's how I got into IT. And then I got into information security at what many think is the original internet security company, which was Internet Security Systems here in Atlanta. And if you look at the today, there's hundreds of InfoSec companies that have spun off because of ISS back then. So that's really where I just dove straight into InfoSec, and I've been doing that ever since. And I was focused on on-prem infrastructure security for many, many years, like I'm sure you were, right? Like we all were through the early 2000s. And then I left Cisco around 3.5 years ago, where I was leading, a team of sales engineers to come over to Sonrai and focus on public cloud security full time. And Joe, holy cow, was I humbled. I thought I understood the public cloud, and I thought I understood how to secure it when I was at Cisco because of infrastructure as a service and monitoring flow logs and protecting VMs. I had no idea about what was happening at the platform level in these cloud service providers. And so that's what I've been focused on the last 3.5 years. It's what I do day in and day out. And, I consult, I teach customers how to build, a platform security strategy focused around access and privilege. And so that's what I do full time. And it's a challenging world that we are trying to protect now as it relates to cloud native. And so I'm sure we'll get into it here as we, continue the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. The cloud, I always tell people that, cloud security is like that graduated level of security. You need experience in several other domains. You need to be deploying technology in those domains before you start jumping into cloud security, because cloud security, you can't walk over to a server and unplug it, right? You can't walk over to a server and console into it. Like that stuff doesn't exist. And a lot of people their initial response would be like, oh, well, that's a problem on the cloud provider. It's like, these contracts are written very differently. And the
It's
cloud
so
provider
true.
is like never at fault for anything.
Well, that's a great point because a lot of what I do nowadays, Joe, is I relate the public cloud situation to the world that you and I both came from. And so many of the folks listening, right? Securing data centers and colos and hardware and, racking and stacking servers and routers and switches and dealing with core and access and distribution issues. And firewalling, right? And, what I liken it to, as far as the world that I see all the time is it's almost like you built a data center, right? And what do we do when we build a data center? We fortify it, right? We put in our firewalls and we build our DMZs. Then we build out our different access layers and it's all zoned and segmented, right? That's just what you do. It's not a nice to have. You got to do that, right? Um, but when we plug into here at Sun, when we plug into customers' environments, it's very interesting to put it gently because everything's flat. Everything can talk to everything in so many scenarios. And it's just because organizations, just like you said, they were thinking, well, the cloud provider is going to take care of all that for me. They're going to secure it. They're going to segment it. They're going to zone it. Each little thing that I provision, each little resource or microservice that I provision, it's going to be in its own little, and again, to liken it to the network days, its own little broadcast domain. Okay. Where it can just talk to itself. And maybe if I tell it to go talk to something else, that's great. But that's not the case. Right. And so they're just not aware that they really need to be thinking of securing the public cloud the same way that they do on prem, that you really, really got to be thinking about segmentation. But in a cloud native world, when we do the segmentation, is it at layer 3, layer 4? No, it's at layer 7. It's at the application layer, right? It's abstracted through the access fabric. That's how everything lives, breathes, and communicates is through the, like you said, IAM. But you got to start thinking of IAM like a network because that's what it is. And so it's so true. When you relate it to something that they're very, very familiar with, all of a sudden, folks' eyes open up.
Yeah, it's a really good point. At my current organization, right, I wanted to, create a resource that I could reach out to the internet. It was in a dev environment, because I was trying to test something, right? And the entire dev team that owned that entire function was like, it's impossible. You're not going to be able to do it. We're not turning off this rule that auto, removes it. All these things, right? I was constantly told it. I was like, guys, I'm going to get around your rule. Like, I'm getting around it. Like whether you like it or not, I'm getting around it. I know what I'm doing. And I'm sorry, like I know that you've spent, 5, 6 years in the cloud and whatnot, but I know how this thing works.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
get these certs by not knowing how AWS works. And sure enough, right? I got through it, and then the next thing that they're complaining about is I'm firing off a lot of alerts. Like, okay, I'll just bypass your alerts. Like, that's not a problem.
Yeah. Well, I think that, back in the days of the on-prem world, everything was, the IT staff, they could do that. They could, manage everything through very, very specific finite ingress egress points. Right. And if you wanted to do something in a test, you had to put in that change control request and you had to, you were at their mercy. But now, Joe, if you want to go do that, just go do it. Just go build it. I mean, there's not in the cloud, there's not, one or two ingress egress points. There's thousands. I think it's fascinating. I think it's absolutely fascinating, Joe, that if I want to log into your cloud right now, all I need is a cred, right? And my laptop right here. So technically my laptop right now is 2 commands. AWS configure. It's 2 commands away from being dropped dead in the middle of your cloud. That's fascinating,
Could you
right?
imagine if like AWS had some bug that bypassed their login? Like you were able to just do it via the console or something like that. If you guess the account number right, you're in the account, whatever it might be. I always think about that because it's like, man, we're putting a lot of trust into
Yes.
this thing. to not fail, and it's created by people like me. And I'm not the smartest person in every single area. Like, I'm a little dumb here and there, so
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, it's you bypass all of your security measures, right? All I need is a cred, and with one command, when the AWS or GCP or Azure SDKs, with my laptop here, I'm just dead center in the middle of your cloud. It doesn't matter what you've got protecting it at the perimeter. And so that really, I think, that's what fascinated me when I started to learn about identity risk is how quickly you could be in the hub of a customer's cloud environment, regardless of what they've done to protect the spokes that they think are the entryways. I mean, they are entryways, but more and more often, what you and I are seeing now, and the market is seeing, is that folks are just logging in. They just log right into the center of your cloud. Then what? And that's where things get really, really hairy.
Yeah, it's a really good point. From a cloud engineer slash architect, my biggest problem is IAM, like, by far. It's IAM, trying to manage the roles, right? What roles we have, what accounts we have, what services are using what. It's a pretty close to impossible task without a solution that is dedicated to it. And it's really frustrating. Like, the most frustrated time that I've ever been was when I was working in IAM on prem. That's when I used to have hair. And like, it's just it's terrible. It's like it can really make your day very difficult, or it can make it relatively smooth, right? It's kind of, I feel like it's just like up to the power of that IAM service, or whatever it might be, is like, are we going to have a good day, or are we going to have a bad day?
Yes, yeah, and it really is daunting. I think I recently heard a term that it resonated so well with me. I heard it. I just came back from September. This was in September, but it was in Seattle, in Bellevue, right? And hosted by the Cloud Security Alliance. And I heard a comment that just really, really resonated so well with me. And it's that you've got to be thinking about cyber garbage,
Hmm.
identity litter. Think about that. That's what we're up against is, like you said, IAM, when it does work, it creates all of these personas, these usually non-person identities, which are vast and vague as to far as what that constitutes, right? But it's just as equally, if not more dangerous than a person identity. But projects come and go. Priorities change. Staff turns over for whatever reason, right? Attrition. And what's left is identity garbage, identity litter, right? But it is scary because it has rights to go do things, right? All it takes is an access key associated with a role or a token, or someone getting a cred out of GitHub or S3. It's still happening, right? Credential exposure is rampant still. So you have all of those different kind of vectors that are just sitting out there, hundreds, if not thousands, that you just don't know about. Like you said, if you're not intentional about it, if you don't have a tool that's designed to go crawl and map it all out and figure out what's out there and what can it do and what can it access, then these are all things that are that you're blind to. But they're all entry points straight into the heart of your cloud. And it doesn't matter how much vulnerability scanning you do, or which compliance standard you're adhering to. None of that matters, Joe. Throw it all out the window when someone grabs one of those creds and uses it to their advantage. So you got to be intentional about understanding what's out there, right, and cleaning it up, getting rid of the litter, getting rid of the garbage, and then governing it moving forward.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's hard to fathom the scale at which you can create, thousands of IAM accounts and roles in your environment. And even, I'm in this thing, right? I do this every single day. It's even difficult sometimes for me to imagine it. And so I work for a large automotive manufacturer, right?
Yep.
You can easily guess whichever one it is. I'm not going to say any more than that, but we consume cloud services almost as a service because our parent company, the one that owns us all, negotiated the contract with the cloud provider and kind of offers up these services as a service to us, right? So they're building out our cloud tenants. They're giving us a blank template, right, to work with, and they have their own controls around it. And their thought, I was talking to these guys, and they said, "Well, how bad can it really get?" Right? We're not giving them everything. Why do they need to create all this stuff? They literally said, "I bet they won't need that many even IAM accounts or roles, right? Because we're giving them the template." And very quickly, within 6 to 12 months, we were at 200,000 accounts, 200,000 accounts across our tenants.
Wow.
And I mean, how do you expect that? How do you have a solution that manages that? When I was doing IAM on prem, we were dealing with 42,000 accounts, and we had maybe 2,500 employees. Each employee had 5 accounts. Most of them didn't even know that those 5 accounts existed. And so, like, we had a lot of dead accounts, right? So, like, if you really factor that in, we're probably at, like, 10,000 accounts, right? 10,000 actual, user accounts that are being used. But this is 10, 20x that. It's like, it's
It
insane.
is. It is. And, you're talking about a very person oriented account, landscape. I would venture that for every one person identity that we at Sonrai see here in customer environments, there's 10 non-person identities to go with it.
Yeah.
That's what's really, really fascinating is the explosion of NPIs. We call them non-person identities, and they are roles, service principals, managed identities, access keys, tokens, things that grant access and privilege to go do things. But they're not as simple to understand as, hey, we're just going to create a user account, right? So it's NPIs that we really, really have to be thinking about. And the other thing, Joe, is even it doesn't matter if it's a user account or a non-person identity, you got to be thinking about the permissions on them, right? It's not just, hey, we're going to go create an account that lets you go do things. You got to be thinking about the excessive permissions and entitlements on all of these things and treat that as risk as well. So not just thinking about cleaning up things that are orphaned and abandoned, but the things that we do need for the applications to run. There's a concept that is growing, thankfully, in this industry of least privilege. And, it is it's the holy grail. Can we get to least privilege? I don't know if anyone's ever going to truly get to least privilege, Joe. That's like saying you're going to fix every vulnerability. You're never going to fix every vulnerability, right? But if you understand which identities mean the most to the business, you know, then you can focus on at least getting them to least privilege so that if and when someone does get in, they can't go wreak havoc in your environment.
Yeah, getting to a full least privileged state. I mean, the only way that you do that is if you start it from the inception of the company. That's
Well,
literally like
you
the
got to
only
build it
way
into
that you.
the development process too, and that is a lot easier said than done, my friend. It's when we plug in, everything's already out there. Everything's already living and breathing. The litter and garbage is out there. But in a greenfield environment, oh my goodness, man, how cool would it be if you built in least privilege into the actual development process? And that's something that, we preach here at Sunry is being able to do that. So that when you do push to production, you've already removed all that nonsense,
Hmm.
right? And you got to have a lot of cooperation and collaboration with the development team, though.
Yeah, that's very true. You have to have everyone on board. You know, when when you were starting out, or even, throughout your career, did you ever feel like, this isn't a fit for me. This is too far above my head. I don't understand what's going on here. They surely hired the wrong person, right? And I asked that because, I started in IT, I guess technically in high school, right? I didn't
Yeah.
know anything. I knew how to plug in a USB and install whatever was on it. Like, that's it. But as I went through my career, for instance, one role was nothing but Linux. I might as well have Linux on my laptop, right? That I was using for the job. That's how much we used it. I mean, I felt like I was not a fit for that role at all by any stretch of the term. Um, I asked this question, right, because I actually get a lot of questions about that. Like, well, I feel like I don't know enough. I feel like, this isn't a fit for me and whatnot, and I feel like it's more about time and you putting in the effort than anything. It'll eventually come. And so I'm wondering if you experience that as well.
I did. It's a great question. I mean, it takes me back, takes me way back. So when I left that training company and got my first network admin role, it was at a company called dice.com, which you may have heard of. Okay. I don't even know if they're still around, but they were, it was like the IT job site back then, before Monster. And so I was their network admin for their training division, if you will. And I will never forget being given the keys to that server room and looking at like all the routers and switches and the firewalls and everything. And they're like, okay, it's all yours. And I was like, okay, I may have bitten off more than I can chew. I don't know I don't know the first thing about any of this stuff, right? As far as the routers, the switch and all of that. I could administer Windows till the cows come home, right? But I'll never forget, we had an outage. It was a PIX. I had to deal with a PIX 506 back in the day. If you remember what a Cisco PIX was, it predated the ASAs. And
I started with the ASAs.
yeah. So I mean, I will never forget. We had an outage, and luckily there was a senior administrator who got on the phone with me and walked me through like the crypto map statements and all that ISACAMP stuff. If you remember, I did not know what I was doing, but I really, I felt over my head, a little bit of imposter syndrome, if you will. But I was humbled enough to not be afraid to ask for help. And I think that's the key, is that I realized, you know what? I can do this. I can be successful at this if I don't act like I know what I'm doing. If I'm able to say, you know what? I'm not an expert at this, but if you can show me, I can take this and run with it. Right. And I think that was a big turning point in my career, is not being afraid to ask for help, not feeling like I have to be the smartest person in the room or anything like that. Right. But then you got to do the hard work, right? You've got to actually apply it so that you really do understand. So the next time it comes around, you're not asking that same person the same question. Can you come in and do it for me? Right. As long as you prove to someone that you're learning, that you're listening, that you really do care. I found that folks really want to pour into you. They do. Folks love teaching other people things, as long as like you're really listening and absorbing and being appreciative. So I think that was one big thing, right? So that, and fast forward to today, I look at how often that has helped me out in my career, right? Where I'm not afraid to say, hey, you're really amazing at this. Is there a way that you can mentor me? Right. And so I think that's it, is be humble. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And be appreciative. It's amazing what people will do for you if that's what you do.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that's definitely something to keep in mind too. When you're going through these different roles, like you're not going to know everything. And even on this podcast, right? I recommend that if you fit 50% of the job requirements in a posting, that you should be applying to it. Because if you're at 50%, I can teach you the other 50%. Right. And yeah, it may be a faster paced environment and whatnot, but we can get through that, you know? When it's less than 50%, it gets a little bit more difficult because it's like, all right, you don't have the foundation that we need, to build this thing, right? And on top
I got
of
to comment on that.
yeah,
I got to comment on that. So, you know, I've done a lot of hiring over the years as I've led sales engineering and even post sales, tech support and TAM teams at various companies. And you could not be more right, Joe, about, the 50% rule. What I want when I'm looking at folks to join our team is passion, right? Obviously personality, right? Does this person seem of great character? Do they really seem genuine? Do they really have an interest? Is there a drive, right? I can teach you the other 50% from a technical perspective if you can bring 50% to the table. And what we've started doing and what I've started doing in my career, because there is such a tech skills shortage, especially in the area that you and I live in, is if I can give you a project, can you go, I'm going to give you a week, right? Go build this lab out in AWS. And I want this lab to do X, Y, and Z. And what I want is in a week, we're going to circle back on a Zoom or whatever. And I want you to walk me through how you built the lab, but I want you to show me which resources you use to learn. I want you to show me that you can go figure it out and that that you're creative, that you're a problem solver. I don't care that you didn't know this a week ago, but if you can go learn this and explain this to me and show that you can do it in a week's time, that's all I need to know because we can work with that. Right. And so I think that absolutely, if you've got like 50% skills or whatever, and there's another half that don't be afraid to go for it and take a shot and heck, offer it up. Say, give me a chance to prove myself. I think you'd be surprised at what hiring managers will do when they see that level of energy and intent from a candidate.
yeah, absolutely. And you also got to be taking like copious amounts of notes. I found throughout my career when I was learning different things. I mean, even now, I'll take a bunch of notes. But when I was learning, not knowing or not even having the background in an area, right, I had to take an insane amount of notes. It was an embarrassing amount of notes. If you looked at my, I think it was like Notepad or whatever it was, I mean, you could scroll in that thing for like 5 minutes, right? But in doing that, you become a very valuable resource, because not only are you experiencing it, you're taking notes on it. Those two things reinforces it in your mind. And from that, you turn into an internal resource for that company in a certain area. For me at this company, it was security. Whenever there was a security problem or anyone asked about security, it was immediately just go to Joe, right? He's the only one that spent any sort of time with it. That's for engineers, that's for developers, that's for the architects. Like that was for all of them. And I was like the lowest man on the totem pole, right? Well, I got there because, I took a huge amount of notes and I kept encountering these stupid problems. And so I was forced to learn it. I had to learn it. Otherwise I was going to, lose my job. Right. And I think taking notes absolutely helps, especially when you're starting in a new role.
It does. It shows you're listening. The cream will rise to the crop. And for all of us, I think at this kind of the level that you and I are at in our careers, I mean, I started in tech support, level 1, right? You got to start somewhere and your work will speak for itself, right? If you are passionate and if you, like you said, you take notes, you pay attention, you show that you want to just, kick butt at the role that you're in, the work will speak for itself. People will notice and it will open the door for new opportunities for you. Absolutely. Right. And it's just, you got to work hard in the beginning, right? And it will be noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a part of working hard, I feel like some people are worried about that being noticed part. They feel like if they put in the work, they put in the time, it's going to be for nothing. I think that's the worst. That's the worst feeling for anyone to feel. when you're putting in the hours, when you're doing the work and you're still not getting the job, you're still not meeting the bar, right? How do you keep going? And to be quite honest, even with this podcast, I have felt that at times. Like I'm doing these episodes and I'm putting all this time into it. I'm learning how to edit, all these different things, right? And it feels like, oh, nothing is coming from this. It's going nowhere. I'm putting my time and effort into something that's not going to help me in any way. And then, it's almost like, the universe, right, shows up, just gives me a little nugget. Like, oh, you didn't think that this would ever happen, and it happens. Things like that. It's a grind. It's hard. There's no way around it, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's true. But I mean, that's how life goes, right?
Yeah.
You got to fight for anything worth having, and it's not going to come easy, and you're going to have to stick it out. And it's like you said, that's happened to you with the podcast. That's happened with me in my career. But I will say this also, you know, um, by the way, I'm not known for having a great filter. I'm known for being overly transparent at times, right? But guess what? If it's not working out for you, if you're working your butt off and it's not being rewarded, if they're not noticing, right? And you think that you've done the things that you need to do to be noticed, then don't be afraid to make a change. I'm serious. Don't be afraid. Don't think that you're stuck in this rut and that there's not any options out there. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there to see if there's other opportunities that could be rewarding, right? And I think that that's kind of what fascinated me so much about coming to Sonrai from Cisco. Like I said, because there's a reason that Cisco is the number one company in the world to work at. It's fantastic. I just so many friends over there and everything. Um, I go, maybe one day we'll all go back to work at Cisco, right? That's not really the point of the problem. It's the point of the conversation here. Um, the point is that I wanted to try something new. I wanted to try something adventurous, right? And Sunrig gave me a great opportunity to do that, right? For back then it was a Series A startup. I took a big risk, right? And Sunrig is a fantastic place to be now. But the point is that if you feel like you're, like you said, not getting rewarded, if you are working your tail off and you don't see a trajectory, then stand up for yourself and make a change. Don't be afraid to.
Yeah, it's a really valid point, and I don't want to linger on this topic too much, but I think that this story will help someone out there for sure. I have a good friend that I worked with at a financial firm, and he was very content with his role, with his company, everything like that, and the management didn't believe in him, because they paid for him to get a certification like 2 times, and he failed the test, not for lack of trying. It was just a really hard test that he was taking. And so they told him, hey, we're never going to fire you, but we're never going to give you a raise. You're going to get the same bonus, here on out. You're going to be in the same role. You're going to be doing the same sort of stuff. You're not going to lead a project or anything like that. And, he worked with all of his friends. For him, he values, friendship over everything else. And he stayed in the job for 25 years. And this year, he got laid off. And he never took the time to develop his skills. He never took the time to invest in himself or anything like that. When I was there, I told him, I was like, dude, if they ever lay you off, like, you're going to have to completely reinvent yourself. Like, because the skills that you have are so outdated at this point, no one uses the stuff that you're familiar with. They only have it here because you're here. They keep you busy with that stuff. And now he's in this year-long journey of figuring out what he wants to do, doing some soul searching. It's like, do you really want to be in that situation when you're 10 years away from retirement? I mean, this guy's 10 years away and
Yeah.
he has to reinvent himself. That's the time to coast, in my opinion.
It's sad that that's becoming a very frequent occurrence, I think, right now, especially in this current economy, right? And like you said, if you're not in a position to, have to put yourself out in the market to be relevant, then, I think you're doing yourselves a disservice. Maybe you won't ever have to, hopefully you will never have to be in that position. But if you are, right, I think it's crucial that you have skills and can not only talk the talk, but walk the walk with modern technologies, especially the cloud. I mean, there's such a shortage of folks, um, whether it's on the vendor side or on the business side, that don't understand how the cloud works. And in this world that I'm in, if you don't understand infrastructure as code and Terraform and cloud formation and how things like, we're talking about IAM roles and how all that works, then you're going to have a really big uphill battle trying to market yourself to companies right now that are looking for folks to secure their networks, or vendors that are looking for folks to sell their products, right? Because everything has a spin now that's cloud native. So I think it's crucial that you go ahead and get ahead of that.
Yeah, it's a great point. With the cloud, and I didn't know this until pretty recently. One of the gold standard certs out there, especially for the cloud, is the CCSP from ISC squared. At least in my opinion, it's a gold standard. It's going to be what the CISSP is known as. Kind of that gold standard cert. And I figured, okay, I'm one of a million that's got this cert. Whatever it might be. I figured I wasn't an outlier by any means or anything like that. And I looked it up, and in North America, there's only 5,500 people with the cert. 5,500. There's a whole lot more than 5,500 companies in North America, right? And it's not because, like, the cert, yes, the cert is extremely difficult. That test was like probably the second hardest test I've ever taken, next to the AWS cert that I got, that I unfortunately have to renew pretty soon here. I'm not happy about that.
Is it the solutions architect?
No, it's the security specialist one.
Yeah. Okay. Unfortunately, I let my solutions architect expire. I was supposed to renew it this time last year, and I'm like, I'll get around to it, and I still haven't. But to your comment on the CCSP, I agree. So I'm a CISSP, and to this day, I've always said that's definitely one of the hardest tests I've ever taken in my life. So I can imagine what you went through for the CCSP, because I don't have that, right? But I agree that, like, that is very, very telling if there's only 5,500 CCSPs in America right now. Because that's just very indicative of the shortage I was referring to.
Yeah, it shows you too that if you put in the work, and you get these certifications, right, there's opportunity available. I think the last time I checked, there was a shortage of something like 5 million jobs in North America, or maybe that was worldwide, right? 5 million security jobs, where it is literally, there's more openings than there are people in the field. That's why security, professionals are always at 100% employed, right? When we change jobs, we're taking 2 weeks off. It's not because we were laid off or anything like that. Like, I had a buddy that was laid off at the beginning of the interest rate hike, because we were at a very interest rate sensitive company. He was laid off, and I mean, the guy took a 2-week vacation. He was back at work at another company. That's what it was.
It's interesting. One thing I want your audience to hear too is, and this is something I learned when I came to Sonrai, is don't be afraid to talk to a headhunter.
Yeah.
That's the whole reason that I came over here, was because a headhunter approached me. I was super apprehensive. I'm like, I've never talked to a headhunter before. I just go to a company's website, or it's a friend that gets me an in or something like that, through the network. But don't be afraid to talk to a recruiter, because it opened my eyes to this whole world, Joe, I didn't know it was out there, where companies actually exclusively work through recruiters. They're not going to post jobs all the time on their websites. Right. So if you've got a recruiter, and trust me, it's like one of those accident attorneys. They only get paid when when they get you hired. So it's not going to cost you anything, right? But they're experts in marketing you. And they have ins to all these different companies where they can market your skill sets, right? So it doesn't matter if you're kind of, like you said, entry level, you don't have all the skill set, or if you are recently, for whatever reason. I mean, this is an economy right now where, riffs and LRs, we're seeing that more and more common, unfortunately. Don't be afraid to talk to a recruiter because it's amazing, kind of the doors that they can open for you.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I've actually explored, partnering with some recruiting firms that I've used in the past that I trust, because I've had really bad experiences with recruiters and I've had, average experiences with recruiters. And then these couple that I use, they're just superb. They're head and shoulders above everyone else. Like it's a huge difference, right? And so I'm actually looking to kind of provide that full suite, right, for my listeners, where they get that idea of, hey, maybe I should talk to a recruiter. Well, who does Security Unfiltered recommend?
Yeah.
But
Well, I've got some
just
folks that I have grown to really, really respect and love and work well with over the years. So that's, maybe offline you and I can exchange those contacts or whatever. But that's another thing is you got to find a good one,
yeah,
right? You got to find one that actually has the relationships, the connections. But there's oftentimes where, there's InfoSec recruiters specifically, right? These InfoSec recruiters have got ends with big companies. I'm not going to say who, but they've got ends with big companies where they feed them really well qualified vetted candidates. Because I'll tell you right now, if you post a job on LinkedIn, I've been there, done that. You'll get 500 applicants within 2 days, and it's all, God bless everyone, but it's mostly career changers and folks that really just they need to be vetted, right? And what that happens for us on our side, on the hiring side, is that it's we can't filter through that. It's not manageable, right? So we really leverage the recruiters to filter and do that initial screening for us to give us, a decent set of candidates that we can talk to.
hmm. Yeah, that it definitely makes sense. For why you would use it. They have that in, and they're able to sell you typically a whole lot better than what you would be able to from an external perspective. When just to circle back right to the cloud. When we're talking about cloud IAM, a lot of people kind of still have that legacy IAM perspective going into it. And I know I had that perspective too of, you know, there, you can have service accounts, you can have user accounts, you can also have accounts that are used only for service to service talk or user to service talk. There's so many different variations. How in the world do you keep track of it all? How do you stay on top of this?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's interesting. Like you're talking service to service, et cetera. I mean, like let's just say that we recently were working with a customer. We found 100 admin level accounts. When we say accounts, we have to be careful. We're talking about identities. Um, but we found another 900 that had an AWS that had IAM pass role privileges. Well,
Wow.
what's that mean? It means that the other 900 with one command could give themselves full admin rights. So essentially, we've got 1,000 administrative level accounts. Well, what does an administrative level account mean? It means it has star permissions. It doesn't have permission to go access one service. It has access to go access 150 services and delete everything that you've got in them if it's used nefariously. That is frightening. That is frightening. And so that's where and I don't want to make this too salesy, but that's what I do. That's what we do at Sonrai is we come in, we plug in, we illuminate everything. We give you visibility into these orphan things and things that aren't used anymore and just identities that you didn't know about at the admin level and all the other levels that you just did not know about. And then we help you clean it up, right? There's a method to the madness here. It's very strategic. This is what we do. We've learned a lot about this landscape over the years, and we help you remove everything that's out there that's not used. We figure out, is it used or not, and we help you get rid of it. Just remove it with a single click in the product. That's massive for making a dent in that risk landscape, Joe. And then with what's left, That's what's there running. That's what's needed. So what we'll do is we'll figure out how to right size each one of those things, right? And that's the whole least privilege thing that we talk about so much. Um, you do your best. And the way that you do your best is that you focus on the identities that matter the most, the ones linked to the crown jewels, not everything in sandboxes and things like that. You get them to least privilege, right? But I think the most important thing that folks aren't thinking about, Joe, as far as really wrapping their head around this mess is how you govern it moving forward. Right? You need a capability out there that can put tripwires around your break glass accounts, that can let you know if a new identity can suddenly access that sensitive data store because of some junior admin putting a new trust relationship out there that they had no idea the impact that it would do because it created these new bonds in the platform. Think of it like a network, right? That created this network conduit to what matters most to the business from a sandbox because they were just doing a quick test, right? And you never can know how infrastructure is code, no matter how much you lint it, no matter how much you scan it, you don't know what it's going to do until it gets out there and it starts living and breathing and interacting with what's already out there. You need something that's watching that and able to tell you, holy cow, we've got a cross account situation or we've got separation of duties or whatever. So I think that governance component is super, super key to really, really being able to tackle this. But make no mistake about it, that's one thing that we've learned over the years here is that you're trying to secure identity in the cloud, and IAM, you got to focus on taking out all of that unused litter and garbage. Get rid of it. Make sure that you're governing for new unused litter and garbage, but then double down on what's out there and restricting it to only the permissions that it needs so that you vastly reduce that risk landscape before a credential gets thrown out in GitHub on accident. Someone tries to use it against you.
Yeah, I feel like the technical side of it is often thought about first before that governance side of it.
Exactly.
And with the cloud, it is so easy to run into a situation where you resolve it within let's say a week, and then the next week you're right back where you were, right? If you don't have the policy side of it set up, if you don't have the checks and balances already set up before you start resolving it, this is going to be something where you're always chasing your tail, so to speak, and trying
Oh,
to
and if you don't have the
figure it out.
buy-in of the engineers and the developers, guess what's going to happen? You remove all this risk today, and tomorrow they're going to push out a Terraform update that's going to put it all back. Think about that.
Right.
All this work, and they just go put it all back. That's something you have to think about. You have to account for the fact that infrastructure as code is responsible for 80% of this mess.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, how how do you make that switch in your head, right? Because I'm coming at this from an engineering perspective. Engineers are hands on keyboard. They just want to get stuff done. They want to make progress, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of the times, the engineer is the one that's also driving the process, right? Because when you're in these sort of situations where you're in over your skis, right? You probably don't have a very good governance to begin with. You probably actually have the engineers, going through and trying to create these policies and whatnot.
Well,
So
yeah,
how,
they're the
how
ones that are pushing everything out there and have been for years with star permissions
right?
because it's easier for them to get their code out there, especially on 2 week sprints. I get it. They're under timelines. So they're not thinking about building least privilege into the application with whatever particular widget they're responsible for. So I think the key from an engineer perspective is you have to sell this story to them in a way that does not come across as impeding their ability to do their job, Joe. Right? We're actually going to flip the script. And what we can do is we can enable the business. Right? We're actually enabling you to build more securely. So if you fit into the way that they do their code, Terraform, Cloud Formation, whatever, if you fit into the fact that they work out of Jira or ServiceNow or ChatOps, which is something that I'm now learning about, which is evolving like crazy, like they're doing all of their jobs through Slack. Um, if you fit into the way that they work, then I think what we have learned is that it does a complete 180, and they actually are much more open to considering building in the pipeline from a secure perspective versus just pushing it all out there and saying, InfoSec, go fix it.
Yeah, I think that's something that's still critical that we have to point out and kind of deconstruct, right? Is that perception that InfoSec is only there to make our lives harder, right? To put barriers in the way of me getting the sprint done and showing, productivity and whatnot, right? There's a lot of the times where I'll come into a company and I'll see exactly that, where it's almost like there's a brick wall in between security and the rest of the organization, right?
Yeah.
And, brick by brick, you have to take that thing down. And I mean, one time it took me a year, right, just to get one team on my side. And it was a lot of lunches I paid for, a lot of drinks I paid for, a lot more than I'm willing to admit to my wife, right?
Yeah.
And, but but it enabled me to get more done in the organization and allow them to actually trust me and say, like, hey, look, just give me this one little thing, I'll show you, it's not that bad, we're going to teach you how to use it, we're going to teach you what to do with it, all that sort of stuff, right? You kind of have to take it over into a white glove treatment sort of thing where they get priority, even if to your manager they don't get priority, but to you they get priority.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And again, I think it's all about integrating into the way that they want to work. If you integrate into the way that they want to work, they're going to be much, much more open. Oh my goodness, we've got a privileged escalation scenario, we've got an SOD violation, whatever it might be. But guess what? We routed that risk to them the way that they wanted to be notified, and they can actually go fix it on their own, and then they can come and automatically it'll self heal on the Sonrai side or whatever tool that you're using, right? It's versus them having to go manage yet another tool that they're getting nagged about or whatever. It's just you've got to start to break down the barrier. And I think that the more that we start to introduce identity security into DevSecOps, I think the better things are going to be, right? Because you're in lockstep then with the development team, with the app team, with the actual business itself from a security perspective. And it's because you're introducing security into the development process instead of just pushing all of that out there and then saying, okay, it's working. And this is what we see all the time, Joe. And it's super scary. These amazing applications, but it is an identity crisis when it gets
Hmm.
to prod. It's spaghetti. Everything can talk to everything. How do you fix that? Because now the business is relying on this application, and this is the plumbing that you built for it. So, a lot of lessons to be learned there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, where do you think cloud IAM is going, in the next 5 years, right? This kind of, I think back to the beginning of the cloud, no one thought about IAM as an attack surface, and now it is the edge, of your cloud. It's how you get in, it's no
Yes.
longer the network, right? You can lock that thing down, but if you have accounts that are open to the world, people can get in.
Well, here's the thing: is I think that 4 or 5 years ago, securing IAM on a priority scale for most businesses was a nice to have. Well, and that back then, that's when we would say identity is the edge, identity is the perimeter. I think we're way past that. Identity is the new network.
Hmm.
Everything lives, breathes, functions, and communicates through the identity fabric in a cloud native world. There's no network landscape. Everything, the accepts and denies, the permits and denies are in the identity fabric on those JSON policies attached to these person and non-person identities, not through managing security firewall rules or next gen firewalls that you're trying to cram into a VM. They don't have their place in a cloud native world. They don't, right? And I think if you look at the way that the market has evolved over the last couple of years, we're seeing more and more companies that are starting to put identity at the forefront of their security strategy. It's not a nice to have, it's an absolute requirement. And when you do that, and then you attach the fact that you're focusing your identity strategy on what matters the most to the business, meaning the crown jewels, not just we're going to secure identity to secure identity and start playing whack-a-mole. You start with what matters the most to the business. Who and what can access that data container, that table, whatever it might be. Start there. and then you work your way out. So there's a method to the madness there, right? You do that, you focus on the hub. That's what I call it, instead of all the spokes. Because right now, so many of the marketers still focus on the spokes. Focus on the hub. When one of those spokes gets popped, it's going to be a dead end. It's a beautiful story. Folks just have to be, willing to accept and understand that identity is the new network, and it must be secured from the inside out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole thing that's changed completely with the cloud. Well, Jeff, I really appreciate the time here. I feel like we could keep going with this conversation for sure. It was very fascinating. We went through, a lot of different rabbit holes and whatnot, but, I think overall it shows the importance of IAM in the cloud for sure.
Absolute pleasure talking to you. Like you said, we could have gone on and on and on. And like I said in the beginning, I hope that folks listening, across the rabbit holes that we went down, I hope that they captured a nugget. Maybe it's about your career, your job, whatever, your skills. But certainly I hope that you picked up a nugget or two about, really rethinking how you are securing your cloud as it relates to where I am an identity and access and privilege are from a strategy and a priority perspective. It's important.
Definitely. Well, Jeff, before I let you go, how about you tell my audience, where they could find you if they wanted to reach out to you, and where they could find Sonrai Security if they wanted to learn more?
Absolutely. Jeff Moncrief on LinkedIn. Please hit me up. Please connect with me. I'd love to answer any questions that you might have. And then I work for Sonrai Security. It's sunraisecurity.com. And we secure some of the world's largest companies as it relates to helping them with access and privilege in the public cloud. We're definitely a thought leader in this space, one of the OGs, if you will. We're purpose built for this. So we would love to talk to you about what we can do for you.
Awesome. And all of the links that he mentioned will be in the description of the episode. So if you want, go ahead and check them all out. All right. Thanks, everyone.